Hey there, I'm Kix Patterson with the Daily Memphian. This week on Soundbites, we decided to publish an episode of the Sidebar. This Sidebar episode was recorded in July with Jennifer Chandler and Tim Barker of Edge Alley about the state of restaurants in Memphis. We hope you enjoy this episode and subscribe to Sidebar and all of the Daily Memphian podcasts wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Eric Barnes with the Daily Memphian, and welcome to the Sidebar, a weekly show on the community, arts, culture, and more. Today we're talking to Jennifer Chandler, food and dining writer, really, technically, for the Daily Memphian, and Tim Barker, restaurateur and consultant to restaurants around Memphis, about the state of restaurants in Memphis. So stay with us for a conversation with Jennifer and Tim. A special thanks to our sponsor, Treasevant Manor. Jennifer, hi.
Hi.
Thanks for coming here. This is the first time you've been on Sidebar.
It is. It's my first time to be on your podcast. Yeah. I'm very excited.
Yeah. You've been hosting Soundbites for us how long? 6 weeks now? It's not too much.
About that long. I started mid-June. So
it's been great. We're really very glad to have you.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here. It's been a nice change and exciting coverage and an incredible newsroom team.
Yeah. Yeah, well, thank you. No, it's great. It's great. And Tim, this is your second time.
It is.
You came on, months ago when you ruined my life by shutting down Edge Alley against my wishes and the wishes of many, many, many people.
Against my wishes, too, I'm going to put in there.
Yes, right.
Very, very sad.
But Edge Alley closed, how long ago is it
now? December 10th was our last service.
December 10th. But you've been involved with restaurants in Memphis and other cities for many, many years.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
many years.
And so I wanted people can go back and listen. And in the conversation, you were nice to come on, I think, in January and talk about your decision to close. I mean, kind of at your peak, right? I mean, you were doing well. I mean, Jennifer and I, huge fans, many, many people, huge fans. And then since then, and as you've come in the last months, there have been a bunch of restaurant closures, and you've written about them, Jennifer. And there have been a bunch of restaurants that open, right? Some that expand, all that kind of stuff. And so I wanted to talk because it's just been obviously a tremendous amount of interest among Daily Memphian readers about what in the world is going on. Is the sky falling? Is it all about crime? What is it? And so I'll go to you, Jennifer, and you wrote a really good story about this, about kind of why restaurants close and all that stuff. But what is your take? You've been covering Memphis food for a long time. What's your take on what's happening?
I think this is one of those times where it's a really hard time to be a restaurant owner right now, not just in Memphis, but across the country. But Memphis has some additional challenges that we've all been facing in the recent months that have kind of, I guess, added a little fuel to the fire of what's going on. I really feel like, in conversations that I have with restaurant owners this is still unprecedented times where lots of industries have kind of bounced back and people are moving on with their lives past the COVID pandemic. Restaurants are still in the midst of all of that and still reeling from the effects and the after effects of what happened 4 years ago when the whole world shut down. They were one of the industries that were hit hardest as far as being lockdowns and having to really, as the word pivot, I'd never really used that word before,
right.
Came into play. And they are still the food costs are going up. It changed the whole labor market as far as it goes for the restaurant industry because people are being paid more, which is good. They probably needed to increase pay for restaurant employees, but that has to be translated into menu prices. The cost has to come somewhere. And there's still a lot of professional restaurant people that when they went through that shutdown, they went on to other professions. So a lot of the people that had a lot of experience are gone is what I'm hearing. And so there are new people that are coming in, but you're having to train them. It's just kind of like this domino effect.
Again, we did a whole podcast about this that you're really nice to do and talk about. But there were many reasons you decided to close Edge Alley when you did. But talk about some of those in the context of what you think other folks in the restaurant industry are facing.
I would echo what Jennifer said. Costs are out of control, both product and labor. Not to mention taxes, state, local, and federal tax. Everything is high. The cost of doing business had gotten to to such a point where I had to decide whether to limit our scope of services or change the products that we were using, or even change the service model. It just became unsustainable to continue doing things the way that we'd been doing them and achieving that level of service and success.
And it really is striking to me that, I mean, you hung on as a patron, right? I'm not a food writer, but I go to a lot of restaurants. Like, I'm a walking focus group of restaurants because I go to so many restaurants, right? You had retained a ton of your staff, at least in the front. I don't know in the back, but you had really, even through COVID, really consistent people who'd been there, and clearly you were treating them well, or well enough that they stayed. Your food was just consistent and really good. And it was not terribly expensive to go to Edge Alley and have brunch or have lunch. I guess maybe it needed to be more expensive, right?
Yeah, that was part of it. I could, raising the cost, raising my menu cost, would have been. We skipped a couple of cycles where I should have increased pricing and chose not to, at the expense of my profit margin.
Yeah.
Even at the prices that we were charging, which I don't think were unreasonable, you start to see, patterns change, in your customers. Like, people who were twice a week started coming once a week or once every 10 days. And it was that's more of a lunch issue. Brunch was always packed and stable, but you do start to see that change. And then you start worrying about whether you're pricing yourself out of people's daily lives.
And it is, again, it's just as a patron of, is that the right word? Just somebody who goes to a lot of restaurants, places I've gone to for a long time, and you suddenly go, oh, that's a lot more expensive than it used to be. Mm-hmm. Like, that's suddenly 30% more or 40% more than it used to be. And I don't begrudge anyone that, but it does make you pause and say, well, maybe I'm not going to go to that place every week. I might go there every other week.
Absolutely.
And I'm going to go somewhere else, or I'm going to eat in, or whatever, and not go.
I agree. To chime in on that, I do, and I'm hearing that from different restaurateurs that I'm talking to. Is inflation is an issue that people are really having to look at how they're spending their dollars, because not only are restaurant prices more expensive, across the board things are more expensive. Yeah. Whether even you're cooking for yourself or going to the grocery store, or just anything you might do for fun, is costing more. And as well as, things you need for your house are costing more. So people are having to really think about where they're spending their dollar. And as you mentioned, people who used to be able to go twice a week out to lunch are now having to make the decision and say, oh, I'm only going once a week. And that's a really hard thing for a restaurant that is already running on such slim margins. And they really do depend on their regular customers to come out and dine. That's how they sustain themselves. New customers are great, but I would almost say that's almost like the butter on or the icing on the top to when you have a new customer come in. But your regular customers, wouldn't you say, Tim,
Absolutely.
are the people that kind of keep you afloat?
Absolutely. And, you get to, so when you start to see that sort of diminishing return on, how often the guest comes to the restaurant. I mean, whether we like it or not, we live in a country where tips are expected or part of the society. It's just a norm. If you get to a point where the servers can't make as much money as they need to make, then they look elsewhere.
Yeah.
And then you're left with servers who maybe haven't been with you for 5 years and don't know everything and aren't as on top of it. And then you have to train new people, and then that costs money. And so then you just end up in this cycle of...
And one of the weird things that happen, and this is obvious probably to you or both of you, but you get to these points where I'm paying 30% more for this food that's pretty expensive, and the server's not great.
Right.
And I'm not a person who's ever gets angry at. My dad was a person who would always get really short with servers. It was one of the horrors of my life. So I'm going to tip really well no matter what, and I'm going to be patient no matter what. But I'm sure for some people, it's never okay to be rude to a server, but you're kind of like, wow, I'm paying a lot more for this. And it's kind of bumbling.
30% extra for the meal, and then another 18% on top of that for gratuity, which is perfectly normal and acceptable.
Yeah.
But But if the service doesn't meet your expectation, then it does change your willingness to go out to eat
Right.
or to go back to that particular restaurant.
Isn't there, again, I should remind everyone, we're talking to Tim Barker, restaurateur, owned Edge Alley, has worked and consulted with restaurants all over Memphis and around the country, and Jennifer Chandler, our food and dining writer at the Daily Memphian. There's also some, and you all can name names if you want to or not, but there's also some restaurants, restaurants close, right? It's a hard business. Sometimes they have a life cycle, right? Sometimes there's a change that has nothing to do with costs or inflation, but whatever happened, it's run its course. There's also restaurants that should have run their course that hang on, right? In that, and again, we can name names or not, but you sort of look and you go, man, that used to be a great restaurant. I love going there, and I wouldn't go there at any price now because they're not the same. But that, I don't know. Thoughts on that?
Yeah,
Jennifer?
that's definitely true. One of the things that I found is it has been across the board when you've looked at the restaurant closures we've had. A lot of them were surprises, and a lot of them were very big disappointments because you had like Tim's restaurant, Edge Alley, who I considered him one of the best chefs, or still consider him one of the best chefs in Memphis, had an excellent restaurant. You look at Dory and David Krog. Again, one of the most talented chefs here in Memphis, running a really unique restaurant. I don't think he opened during the pandemic. I don't think he ever got a sea legs. And that's what happened there as far as being able to say. But again, he was an expensive price point. And so people were not going there multiple times a week. And probably not even multiple times a month because of the price point. But his food was excellent. So things like that, I think, are just heartbreaking to me. But I agree with you. There are restaurants that are trying to stay open and that are staying open. And it could be that there's some places that stay open because of nostalgia. There are all places, we all have places here in Memphis that we do go back to because we went there as a kid, and the food may not be as good anymore and the service may not be as good, but you know what? We grew up going here. We have memories here. And so sometimes you overlook that if there's a place that's dear to your heart. But yes, I think that there are places in Memphis that are not what they used to be. And it is sad. And a lot of that tends to be, I think, when people get older, chefs and restaurant owners, probably saw themselves at a different place or trying to be more hands off. That's one of the things about this industry. You have to, and I know Tim will say this, I never went to Edge Alley and he was not there. You have to be there. I had a restaurant years ago, 100 years ago, and I know that as much, as you loved your employees, I would hear from customers that things weren't quite the same if I was not in the building.
Well, you think about that, and it really is remarkable that Andrew and Michael have been able to do what they've done. But they also, they have multiple restaurants that are really, really good. They're very expensive, but I go to a fair number of them fairly often, and they're full. Except Bishop, they had to close, and Great Canary, they had to close, right? They for a variety of reasons. Like Bishop, I think, I was talking to somebody from Andrew Michael Group. I forgot that they opened 4 months before COVID started, and when they opened, for me, that was just like it was amazing. Like the food, the service, it was just this cool French bistro thing. And then they just never found their sea legs, kind of like what you said about Dory, I think. And, those guys have been very successful, but they had to pull the plug on that. It didn't work.
Well,
and that was probably a good thing. As somebody who went there a lot, like it had kind of lost, and I look forward to whatever comes next there. But it lost its mojo.
I think some of what happened there, and I'm not 100% sure on this, but when you go into I think that they were part of the restaurant. And so that there were probably some demands when you think about food cost and making compromises that were coming from a corporate level.
Because they're part of that hotel.
Yes, because they're part of the hotel. So they weren't fully 100% in charge. I'm guessing. I've never had that confirmed, but I would assume that's probably what happened there. I know that when Great Canary, again, that was another great restaurant that we lost. That had something to do with the fact that, Dominic was wanting to go with a different direction with that space. They felt that they were doing so many events that they felt that they could use it as an event space. So that kind of became a landlord issue. So some of these you can kind of look at and see what the reason that they close. And I think sometimes for me, if you fall in love with a place and you start to love things about the place, and then the restaurant owner starts messing with it too much, and it loses what I consider its soul. It goes back to when you were talking about not wanting to compromise, because one of the things that, Tim, you did was really cool is that you made everything from scratch. And nobody really does that at a cost.
At a cost, and I don't think people realize that cost. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was, and you were not willing to give that up. When I talked to David Krog, he was the same way. He was like his commitment to being zero waste. He goes, if I can't run my restaurant the way I want to run my restaurant, I am not going to run my restaurant. And again, that's huge losses. Those 2 restaurants being closed to Memphis in our restaurant scene.
Also, just to speak to Bishop and pivoting, I think that another thing people don't realize is, I mean, we all complain about, I mean, everybody sees that costs have gone up. But what people don't realize is what that does to a menu, right? So when Bishop opened, they had a raw bar and they had, these 10 fish, all these new things. They had caviar service. They had champagne. I mean, it was a beautiful restaurant. They did a great job. But all those products got really expensive. And then the alternative to those products also got really expensive. And then the alternative to the alternative has gotten really expensive. And so now what do we serve? Because it used to be, okay, well, I can't afford filet mignon anymore. I'll serve, culotte, or I'll serve shoulder tender, or I'll serve a different cut of meat that's satisfying equally, but costs less. But now all of those proteins have gotten to be unattainable.
Yeah.
And then there are shortages. There are issues with availability there. I mean, it's kind of like there's a trickle down. Yes, the costs are higher, but how much can I charge for it before somebody says, "Damn, that's too much"?
Well, you had an example where you were when you were still doing dinner service at Edge Island. You wanted to do 3 scallops.
Oh yeah. We were talking about this the other day. Yeah. The day I decided to stop doing dinner was it was a good night, busy night. I had ordered scallops, and for me to put 3 scallops on a plate with nothing else costed out to $50.
Yeah.
And that doesn't include any garnish, vegetable, rice. I don't even think I included labor in that. It was just, I want scallops, but it's just unreasonable. No one is going to pay me $50 for 3 scallops on a plate.
Yeah.
I mean, someone does, because I see it on other people's menus, but for me, I just thought,
well, and then it was out of sync with what you were doing.
This just isn't sustainable. I don't want to keep. I had an opportunity. My lease was up, so for me, the decision. I had lots of reasons to not continue.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Let me do some quick housekeeping. We're here with Tim Barker and Jennifer Chandler. Remind everyone, this is the Sidebar. It airs on WYXR 91.7 every Thursday at 11:30. It's not just a radio show. It's one of many weekly podcasts we do at the Daily Memphian, including Bill Dree's politics podcast, too many P's. On the Record, we do the Memphis Grizzlies podcast with Chris Harrington and Drew Hill, and our food podcast hosted by Jennifer Chandler at Soundbites. It also airs on WYXR every Thursday at 11. You can get all those shows at the Daily Memphian site or wherever you get your podcasts. We also host the podcast version of Behind the Headlines, the show we do with the folks over at WKNO every week. And just a quick reminder that WYXR, if you're listening to it here, it is listener-supported nonprofit radio. So consider a donation, consider becoming a member. And with the Daily Memphian, if you're not a paid subscriber, do consider becoming one. That's how we support what is also a nonprofit, the largest newsroom in the region. So if you are a paid subscriber, thank you. If you're not, consider becoming one. Next week, we've got Willie Bearden, the writer and documentarian filmmaker, coming on to talk about his new book, Mississippi Hippie, A Life in 49 Pieces. I actually recorded that before this today. It's awesome. Willie is fantastic. It's very funny. We also recently had Toby Sells from The Flyer on. He also wrote a crazy new book that he is out selling, and we talked about that book and other things going on with Toby. And we had Rose Smith, who's the director of assistant curator of photography at the Brooks on. That was a really great, interesting conversation. Behind the Headlines, recently Brent Taylor and Josh Spickler talking about criminal justice, public safety. We had the new president of Christian Brothers University, I guess technically the interim president, and the head of the board as CBU climbs out of the hole they've gotten themselves into. And coming up soon, I think this week on Behind the Headlines or next week, Frederick Agee, who's the district attorney in Haywood, Gibson, I think Crockett counties, talking about all kinds of things from a point of view of a district attorney. He's a really interesting guy. It's going to be a great conversation. He has lots of thoughts about Steve Mulroy and the fire that he's been under in Shelby County. So that's Frederick Agee coming up soon on Behind the Headlines. But we've got about 8 minutes left here with Jennifer Chandler and Tim Barker. Some places, meanwhile, it's not all doom and gloom. Like Echo, I mean, I go to Echo a lot. It's Leslie and my girlfriend and I mean, we go there at least once a week. It's always packed, virtually always packed for dinner. I think they only do dinner. And they're expanding, right? They're taking over the old Diane space. Somebody's going to come into the old Bishop space. There's a group going into your space, Tim.
That's right.
The folks at Little Rock. So, like, is it just there's always someone who has a dream? I mean, it's not always a bad business. It's just a cycle to some degree. Yes? No?
Yes. I don't think it's all doom and gloom. I think that, like I said in our previous podcast, I think that to some extent, my concept maybe ran its course. That's perfectly natural. I just was able to choose to not be open anymore. I think that what the guys are coming in to, just speaking about my space, what the guys are doing in my space, I think makes a lot more sense for the neighborhood as the neighborhood's developed. We didn't know what the neighborhood was going to look like when I opened because there was not much there. I think that their concept makes a lot more sense for that neighborhood than mine did.
Which, tell again, just the name and the concept. Craig Brewer walking by while we're doing our podcast. This was what happens.
Trailer dropped today.
Which trailer?
For Fight Night.
Oh,
cool.
Okay.
It's on YouTube. Check it out. It's cool.
Very cool. All right.
A little cameo.
Little cameo. Yeah, right. We leave that in. Now we leave that in. That's Craig Brewer. We're sitting here in Crosstown because our studio got flooded. Those who lost track of this, we're on the 10th floor, and a long time ago, 6 months ago. Anyway, keep going. So the people coming into your old space.
Yeah. So Flyway Brewing Company out of Little Rock purchased High Cotton Brewing, and they're expanding into what was Edge Alley. The two spaces are connected with a very large opening in the middle, so they'll have one large brew pub concept.
Yeah. And that, do we know when they're opening? I mean, you might.
They're looking at mid-August.
Mid-August. Oh wow! Right
So hopefully in the next couple of weeks.
And they have a little bit of a local connection. They have partnered with Scott Tashy, who owns City Silo, is part of that group, so that brought them there. And
the City Silo's example, they're moving to a bigger space.
Yes,
over
they
by Clark
are.
Tower. I mean, and I go there for lunch because part of our office is out at Clark Tower right now, and they're packed
all the time.
Yeah,
I had an interesting conversation with Danny Sumrall, who had Half Shell, who's been for half a century. He'd probably hate me for saying that because it sounds really long, but he's been in the restaurant business for that long. And when I was interviewing him about selling his business a couple of weeks ago, he had said that he thinks that being a restaurateur is the best profession in the world, and the rest industry for him.
Tim's
I know
making
Tim's
a face.
making a
Tim's
face
making
over
a face
here
right now. Hard to describe.
So for some people, it's not all doom and gloom. But one of the things, as he said, is very important is to find a concept that works for you, that adds, that you know that the customer feel adds value to their life. And that can be an interesting way to look at it. I felt Edge Alley added value to my life, so
I would agree with almost everything you said.
but that was interesting.
It was kind of like it's like a Harry Potter thing where the life you and I got from Tim's restaurant, it was coming from Tim. Tim was transferring some of his soul to us every single day, which I appreciated.
Exactly.
I was better for it.
But it's interesting about looking when you talk about concepts is that, Kokoza is expanding, and that is a concept that is from the Majestic Grill owners, Denny and Patrick Riley. They developed that concept during the pandemic when they said they didn't want to open the Majestic, and when they couldn't open it in all their majesticness was a quote that I was given. And they came up with a quicker service, more family friendly, more casual concept. And that's the direction they're going with as they're expanding their footprint and their business when they open their second location in East Memphis later this year. So I think that some people are really shifting gears. I think we're still going to have some great food, but I'm a little fearful of what's going to happen to our high-end restaurants because of the price points. And because of the service requirements that I think we're about to see a trend of people becoming more casual, fast service, I think that's going to be kind of a move that a lot of people are going to be going in that direction right now.
Yeah.
I would agree with that. I think that the expectation of a fine dining restaurant is unsustainable. The customer's expectation, and to some extent the owner's expectation. Not that my restaurant was fine dining, but we all get into this for different reasons. And for me, and for Dave Krog, lowering our expectation of ourselves was just unacceptable.
Because you're giving so much time and truly giving life to this. I think it probably shakes out that there are a handful, right? That they're high-end, expensive dining that will make it, and they're. I mean, you've said to me, Tim, and we won't name names, but just some restaurants maybe shouldn't have opened, and they just shouldn't have.
Absolutely.
And it is good people meant well.
Yes.
Whatever. It just.
Or they got into the business for the wrong reason, or they didn't have the passion beforehand, and sometimes those businesses need to close so someone else can come in and do something great.
The other thing, I mean, I travel a ton, and I'm the walking, one-person focus group. I was in Nashville last week, in downtown, and they a bunch of really cool restaurants that were opened, right in downtown, up from Broadway, really kind of fine dining. You would think sort of the Andy Michael kind of space or whatever. I was there on a Thursday night. Streets are packed. There were no one in these restaurants. No one. I went into one. I was one of 3 tables. I was sitting at the bar. There were 2 tables. Another one, the same thing. Another one that I used to go to is closed. And I think, as I thought about it, the clientele, the people downtown Nashville now, they're really not there for fine dining. They're there for karaoke and,
Pink cowboy hats.
Yeah. I mean, there's other parts of Nashville where I'm sure the restaurants are doing well. But I say that Portland is going through it. I have family and friends in Portland and Seattle. Their downtowns, and not just their downtowns, but they were shutting down before COVID, the restaurants in downtown Portland, because it had gotten so expensive to do business in Portland. And so there was this shakeup happening, and now it's just gotten worse through COVID and kind of the aftermath of that. So I don't know that there are stats, but again, my anecdotal experience in New York as well, where my daughter is, and there are a million great restaurants in New York. I'm not saying there aren't, but there are a lot that closed. There's just this shakeout, back to the original things that you talked about, Jennifer, that these are not unique to Memphis. And people can talk about crime in Memphis, but downtowns across the country, taking New York out of it, which seems really normal again, downtown patterns of how people work and live have changed dramatically. So whether it's crime and there's just not enough traffic, foot traffic and people in some downtown spaces, that hurts too. So.
And I wish I could remember the stat, is the story I did when all these restaurant closures happened in June. I went to the NRA, the National Restaurant Association, and one of the things that they talked about was happening in their forecast for the year, state of the restaurants but basically what it boiled down to is they said that competition is harder than ever now. And for people competing for everyone's dollar, because there are not as many dollars right now.
We're out of time. Thank you both. Thanks very much for doing this. I asked you last time you were on, but I've already forgotten. First concert you ever went to?
Tim McGraw.
Tim McGraw?
Yeah.
Where was that?
Martin, Tennessee.
Martin, Tennessee?
Yep.
And Jennifer, first concert you ever went to?
I kind of, if I could sing, I would sing Sean Cassidy at the Mid-South Coliseum. Do-do run. I can't even say it. Do-do
Sean
run,
Cassidy,
run,
that
run.
is a first. That's fantastic. I think Tim McGraw's a first, except you probably said it last time.
I said it last time, but yeah, Tim McGraw.
It's
Yep, I was 14.
Tim Barker and Jennifer Chandler, thank you both for being here. Appreciate it. Obviously, you can follow Jennifer on the Daily Memphian, writing about all these kinds of things, good, bad, and just the changes. And also, you can listen to her on Soundbites, which follows the Sidebar every week, Thursday on WYXR. You can get everything as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube. You can go to dailymemphian.com. All of our audio is there. Thanks very much. And we'll see you next week.